Okay, so everyone, welcome to our conversation on privacy, Facebook, and social media. I will be saying privacy instead of privacy because it sounds cooler, and it's all about attention points. And I'm somewhat English. Let's start by introducing the panel, including our top secret person who has no name, and explaining why you are here, if you can.
Oh dear. Well, my name is Karana Severed. I run Anomaly Con as a science fiction and steampunk convention. I'm highly active in the steampunk community, also an author. I'm also one of the youngest systems engineers you'll ever meet. I'm older than I look though, darn it. And I've spent a lot of quality time working on a lot of interesting projects. But I've also been on the internet since before most people knew it was the internet. I started out with BBSs when I was like freaking 7. So, you know. Aside from like today's modern generation, that's probably unusual. So.
Yeah, I'm Arlen Feldman. I'm a software guy, but I've got something of an interest in this because some of the software I deal with deals with some of this stuff, and some of it does not. I despise Facebook, so just to state that up front, since it's actually in the panel name.
My name is John Smith.
Not fooling anyone, you know.
Literally Winston Smith.
No, and I am also a software geek, but I mainly am in this because Facebook pisses me off.
Let's just spend the hour bitching about things.
It's because they keep changing the privacy settings. Anyways,
I'm Stace Johnson. I work in IT for Adams County 911, and I've written about 30 articles for computer magazines.
Any of them on privacy?
Yeah, kind of, early on, especially about Wi-Fi security and privacy.
So I'm going to start trying to avoid, at least initially, some of the specific political things. I imagine we will get into them since there was a raging debate before the battle even started. I'm sorry, the door ended up sticking.
thank you.
Thanks. This will be your role for the.
So you get presented back.
Yes. Thanks. And instead of just jumping right into the politics of it, I just want to talk about from a philosophical perspective. Is privacy something that is a major concern for, I'm going to call it, our generation, and the upcoming generation, apparently? Or is versus, it does seem to me that there is a big gap between what is considered private.
So like between Xers and millennials?
Yes. I see absolutely no one in this room. Okay, I see one person. You must speak
I'm
for...
18. I will speak for my people.
Sing us the song of your people.
No! There is a song about that. It's called Teenagers Scare the Living Shit Out of Me.
It's pretty bad when you're already 18 and you're already afraid of the 13-year-olds.
13-year-olds are very, very scary. So let's start with the panel, and then I actually, since you are our token...
At least she's not also a token female, all right?
Yes.
At least, yeah. Sorry, you guys. That's really awkward being the only woman on a panel in a room full of guys, and you're talking about computers, and they're all like, "What do you know about computers, lady?"
I find it very awkward to be the only woman on the panel.
I'm sure you would.
And sadly, that has happened.
It's way too late.
Why don't we start you and actually get on to the topic at hand?
And what was the question?
There was a question?
Is there a difference in, is privacy a concern for...
Or different? Are the thoughts of privacy different for different generations? Do we have different expectations and different concerns?
I think so. A few years ago, I went to a telecommunications in the Rockies presentation that happened, and one of the topics there was the digital divide between people at that time who were under and over 40, and how they had different perceptions of what the term communication had. And privacy was a huge piece of that, because the people who were younger in the room younger than 40 seem to have less concern about it than people who are older. I don't know if that goes across the board, but
Jimmy, you act like a much younger person.
I'm an Xer. I'm an Xer. It seems to me that people that I see on social media, I don't really do Facebook. I do Twitter. It seems like younger people are more open to like, hey, I'm gonna check in with Foursquare, or I'm gonna, whatever. I'm drinking a beer at this bar, and and then they don't have a concern about that, and that information is just being vacuumed up, and maybe it isn't wrong. I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting because for the con-goers, so many artists and writers, there's this huge effort for years and years to get any way to get anyone to hear what you had. I mean, I don't know how many people here did zines back in the day. Yeah, but and now it seems like, you know, it's the reverse problem. I mean, it's now so many people are out there yelling that it's almost impossible to be heard because it's so easy to get your word out there, which is not really about privacy. But yeah, from my perspective, I don't want people to not know who I am. I mean, I have books I would like people to buy and things like that. But the idea of, you know, people knowing where I am or what I'm doing all the time really disturbs me. But I've spoken to young people who it's no big deal. Now that might not be true when they get a job.
Burn?
That wasn't like I just went.
I mean, come on, some of us were working that young, seriously.
Yeah,
No,
13.
you know, I think you don't know paranoia until you have like clearance and they drill into your head how everyone in the entire world is trying to get all the information you must personally know. And I can give a little very brief life story about that. I was in Japan in April and I was staying with host family who I'm familiar with. We've stayed with them before. They're super awesome, but they also had a couple of, actually 3 people staying from other countries there. I had 1 kid from Korea, 1 kid from China, and I say kid, she's a couple years younger than me. Freaking brilliant woman, like working on her doctorate at 25, like knows 5 languages, amazing woman. And some idiot kid from freaking Norway. And the Norway kid, basically it took 3 seconds for me to decide he wasn't a threat. The girl from China never asked me anything about my work. She just accepted that, you know, I work on computers, whatever, and we just had other conversations. But the kid from Korea, who did not speak very good English, kept asking me questions about my work, which made me paranoid. Not because I have any thoughts that a 23-year-old is a spy or trying to get any information or somehow magically, mysteriously knew that I was going to be there at that time and could tell him things about the program that I work on, but because in my experience having that clearance, I know that some tiny little tidbit of information could come back to haunt me later. And so I, of course, sidestepped the question in as many ways as I could. And when I get back, my coworkers pat me on the back for that story because I'm acting with a level of paranoia. And I think the big problem that we have right now with this privacy question is there's a level of paranoia that has settled in within a certain generation that didn't exist prior because of perhaps a level of naivety that existed in the older generation to computers and things like that, and exists less again in the younger generation. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily because the older generation could go out and hang out with their neighbors and be safe. They trusted each other. And the middle generation is terrified and trying to teach their kids that they're terrified of strangers. And so you have all these advertisements trying to convince people to be afraid of strangers. And you have all these things going around about how all of your information is being stolen from you and all this other stuff. And whether that's accurate or not, you have this situation that's being created where people can't trust the people sitting around them. And even if those people are trustworthy, you feel like you can't trust those people around you. And that creates this same attitude that occurs when you don't trust people not to steal. If you look at a whole group of people and you don't trust them not to steal, they're going to feel that from you and somebody's going to steal something. Because they figure, you didn't trust me anyway, I might as well do what you're accusing me of doing. Same thing happens in violent situations. And so I feel like the fact that the younger generation is willing to share with each other, well, in some ways is a little scary because some of us, you know, a lot of kids don't realize how much information is too much, right? And that's just a matter of their parents not understanding they need to educate them against that. Because their parents don't know how to use a freaking computer. It terrified me when my mom got a smartphone. And she still freaking texts me all the time, this stupid phone. But the younger generation is bringing back a level of trust in each other that encourages community growth in a way that the middle generation, my parents' generation / the slightly younger than them but older than me generation, you guys, is paranoid about. Like, they're freaked out on I'm one of the youngest people on my team, and everybody else is freaked out by the idea of sharing information because they're scared of their neighbors.
So first off, tell us in detail about the program you work on, if you would.
You can Google it, and that's all you get.
Yeah.
I work on a GPS program, and you can Google it, that's
I know
all
a
you
bunch of
get.
people who do. Let me actually just follow up on something you just said, because I think it's an interesting point. When one talks about, well, my friends and my neighbors, that concept has a completely different meaning now. If you have 6,000 friends on Facebook, most of whom you have never met, isn't that kind of a little bit different than trusting the kids in the neighborhood with whom you grew up?
Funny story, you can Google this article. There was a study done recently, and they passed it around my work because they really like to focus on, oh my god, you need to be paranoid. There was a story, like a study done, because people are convinced that teenagers are the ones who are trusting the most strangers that they shouldn't be trusting. And statistically speaking, a middle-aged person, roughly about my mom's age, especially my mom's demographic, tends to be the most likely to friend people and to tell people things they shouldn't and not realize that's a fake profile, that's not a real person, and feed data mines and not know that they need to go onto Google and turn off all these data mining programs and stuff like that. Teenagers, on the other hand, especially teenagers in the range being raised right now versus teenagers when I was a teenager. I'm 29, by the way, if anyone's wondering. Let me just throw that.
Yeah, me too.
But I turned 29 2 days ago versus you probably turned 29 a few times. But anyway, since we're picking on the youngest person in the room, we might as well also pick on some other people here. But the study shows that teenagers are more likely to be careful about who they friend and more likely to know all the people they're friending than someone who's just hopping on a computer and like, oh God, look at all these people who want to be my friend, and here's Sally from church who knows XYZ from this person. And let me tell you, my
Well,
mom's
they're the first
profile
generation.
knows
They're the first generation who's grown up with social media, so they probably are better at it.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I think that's a given because,
Yeah.
yeah, somebody who if I can't imagine dealing with my mom being on social media. God no.
I
So-
still get emails asking her how to attach things to email.
Yeah. So token young person.
I mean, I think there's definitely a huge divide. It's more so than just like a lack of privacy. It's a complete and utter like socialization and desperation for attention. That like our whole lives are social media. Like I have a Facebook and that's about it. But most people have a Facebook, a Twitter, an Instagram, a Vine, a Foursquare, and you want everyone to know where you are all the time because we can't even talk to each other face to face anymore. I mean, that's a little bit of an overstatement, but it's our whole culture is to let everybody know like what you're wearing that day, where you're going, so that they can hang out with you, and your whole life all the time is on display, and that's just a very, very pervasive thing in our culture as young people.
Wow, that sounds ghastly to someone.
I mean, it's kind of terrifying and weird. Like Spotify is like a thing now. It's like iTunes, but you don't have to pay for it. But I resisted getting it for a long time because your friends can see the music you're listening to. Like, why is that necessary? Why do my friends need to know what I'm listening to? But that's who we are because, I don't know, we need, like in our individualist culture, we want to be like, this is me, this is my personality all the time.
You know, I think it harkens back to, we went through this time period, like it used to be back when we didn't have quite as large of a civilization that everyone in a small town knew everything about everyone else, and so you didn't need like a social media kind of situation because everyone knew what was going on. You knew if somebody was sick, you knew if somebody was having trouble, and people knew that about each other. But as you get larger, then your nuclear family shrinks down into a much smaller ball. Like I have a daughter now who's 3, and so like even though I have this humongous immediate family who lives nearby, I'm like, and I'm just cutting my nuclear family down to just the 3 of us because I really don't want to deal with my 5 other siblings and all this other ridiculousness going on. And I think that having now gone like a generation where that's the case, where people are cutting each other off, where people don't even really want to watch the news or read newspapers because they're afraid of everything going on in the world around them, that the next generation is like, oh my god, we're lonely. Can we like reconnect, please? And so what's been handed to them is, here's a smartphone, here's this stuff, and that's great because it also means that there's a global community. It makes it a lot easier for you to reach out and make friends with somebody. I have Facebook friends all over the world. I don't talk to them all that much because unfortunately I'm sure Raytheon is looking at my freaking Facebook profile and making sure I'm not talking to spies. And that leads us back to the privacy conversation and paranoia.
So one of the things that, there's been a little pushback on this, but for a while, a number of companies, if you want to go work there, they require that you give them access to your Facebook account.
Never gonna happen.
And
Yeah, there have been governments or state or city municipalities that have tried to do that. I don't know if a court decision has
it's
happened.
actually,
There has
not
been
yet, but there's been some pushback. That there are some court cases moving through the court, but this is actually more companies than government. This is more,
Well, I've seen state governments and city governments do it too.
oh, right, okay.
But yeah, it's entities that want information on you. They want to, and their goal is that I want to know if this person is going to be a problem.
Right.
And that's their motivation. But I think it is a violation of privacy.
Well, but the
It's
thing
more than
is,
that, because so many people have been fired for what they put on Facebook. There was a case just a few
Right.
weeks ago, a nurse got fired for putting, here are the conditions of my work, on her private Facebook page. Private.
Yeah.
Well, that's caused a lot of hell with the fact that Facebook has been trying, and fortunately they have finally lost this fight and they're backing off on it. But Facebook tried suddenly to enforce a real name policy. Now some of us,
Because it worked so well for Google Plus.
They have not backed off, by the way.
they've partially backed off on it. At least they've apologized to all of the, supposedly, all of the...
Well, there were some trans people, I think,
Yeah.
that were being, or there were some drag queens, I think, that were.
Drag queens were the loudest about it, but a lot of trans people were
Yeah.
a lot... had a
Well,
lot of problems
plus
with
a
it.
lot of people in places like China and...
Right, and there's also people-
You know,
People-
some of those people can make up whatever the frick name they want, and
That's
as
true, they
long as it
wouldn't know.
sounds real, it wouldn't matter. The issue was that Facebook was making a judgment call on what was a real name and what wasn't. And then people can put on like their dog, Peanut McFly. I have a friend named Peanut McFly, the dog. And they can add this animal as a freaking person on Facebook, and they get away with it, but then Facebook was targeting groups.
It is, as of this morning, another friend, I write electronic literature, and a lot of us have different names. Mikhail Ann has been writing as Mikhail Ann for 30 years. He just got kicked off of Facebook, and he is now Mikhail Anderson. That was the only way he could get back on. So it is still happening today.
And it's happening primarily from Facebook's perspective because even though of course they won't come out, they claim that it's a safety thing. It's the same reason everyone else claims. It's because Facebook wants to drive sales of their page likes. So they try to force groups and people with any kind of a stage name to use their page system. It's maddening. And one of the fortunate things is I don't write under a pseudonym. But the other thing is that despite having a clearance and everything else, I go in full disclosure, but I didn't always, right? So I certainly never would have let any company prior to the one I'm currently working have seen my Facebook, and I still filter my stuff because I post a lot of feminist information. I post, hey, this is what's going on in gay rights. Hey, this is what's going on, and and I also post a lot of stuff about sci-fi and stuff like that. And while I work with a lot of sci-fi geeks, somebody higher up might be like, what the heck is this person doing?
Is that more or less intrusive than, say, a drug test where you're required to give bodily fluids to the government?
Yeah, but you can't tell from bodily fluids yet what somebody's thinking.
Your ideas are not involved in, body fluid tests. It's really the idea of freedom of thought. Freedom. I can have these thoughts, and it's none of my employer's freaking business what I'm thinking.
well, and the thing is, I think it's more intrusive for them to want to have access to private information simply because of the fact that sorry, I lost my train of thought.
We'll just stare at you uncomfortably.
No, take a minute.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry, can you remind me what we were talking about?
So we're talking about, companies requiring
Right,
access
right.
to your
Right.
Facebook account.
I think it's more intrusive simply because of the fact that if they drug test you, generally they're drug testing you for safety reasons or for reasons of trying to
Technically
determine
avoidable, but
determine whether or not you're a risk to the company or to yourself, or whether you're using illegal drugs. It's not illegal to fake, and it's
Right.
not illegal to post anything on Facebook.
Not yet.
Yeah, for the moment.
Yeah, it's not illegal to think, yeah.
Well, and we should make sure that it doesn't become illegal.
What about companies looking at what you publicly write on Facebook?
You
I'm fine
know,
with that.
I'm just saying, that's on your ass. If you haven't figured out yet to change your privacy settings so that every single post you post is not public, then you are asking for trouble.
Well, that's the problem with Facebook though,
Yeah.
because you can set it up and they will change it on you.
Yeah.
They will turn everything back on. Periodically, they will just, and they won't tell you. They just turn it back on. That's why I use Facebook basically to keep track of other people, but I don't post.
Yeah,
Because
that's,
I'm,
yeah. The thing that creeps me out is the stalker feature that will say, hey, this is where this person is at this precise moment all of the time.
You know, having a
that's-
clearance made me stop checking in places, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
yeah.
But is that, is that a common thing for people to leave that on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we want everyone to know where we are. I generally don't associate with my peers for the most part. But
You're a design
I'm our
manager.
peers.
Yeah, no, I'm often
You
the
understand
token young person. But I mean, you're like, hey, I'm at this bar, everyone come hang out with me. And I think it's that desperation because we have grown up with social media where we can't have face-to-face conversations, or we have to be validated is I think a big part of it. You have to be like, look how cute I look today, look at the cool food that I'm eating today, look at this cool place that I'm at today.
But what about the safety concerns? Does that get just ignored, or is it thought that, oh yeah, sure, that's gonna be a problem, but.
You
I
know
mean,
what,
it
they
depends
wouldn't
on-
have this.
Depends on the person. I mean, that's an individual's thing. Like my mom is pretty content with having her location known, and like I'm really not. So I think that's more of a person by person thing necessarily than a generational. For the most part, I think it's not thought about.
Dave?
I post on Facebook and everything's public, but I would never put anything, I mean, all I talk about is stuff like cars.
I was about to say, I know it was on the subject.
Yeah, nothing,
Coin
nothing, I wouldn't even put that because I don't want to be targeted that I'm going to be robbed. So the only thing I put is real and not,
Innocuous kind of stuff.
yeah, if anything controversial, I never put anything political, anything, it's just, no, it's not.
I've done things on religion and on politics when I was blogging, not on Facebook, but now I'm too lazy to blog. But those blog posts are still sitting up there, for years and years and years later.
Yeah, but you also are a partial owner of your company. So that-
Right, but a customer for our company might look at that and decide not to buy the product because of,
There's
you know,
that.
so.
You know, I mean, you run that risk no matter what you do, right? It doesn't matter whether you're talking about customers, if you're talking about readers or anything else like that. It's the same reason that as someone who runs a convention and does a lot of business conversations with our authors, among other things, I just tell people, if you don't want it seen, don't freaking post it. It's like with authors, there are some authors who have this mentality that I can post whatever the frick I want on my personal page on Facebook, but I'm not going to filter it out. And so you get these authors who will go on like these crazy rants. They'll go on like this anti-women rant or this anti-XYZ rant, and frequently, for some reason, it's anti-Democrat. I don't know why. But those are the authors who always go on this off the deep end rant. And then suddenly you don't hear from them for a few days, and then they get upset that somebody got upset at them for posting something on their private page. But it's not private unless you turn off all the public postings. And what you have to realize is that if you are in that situation, if you are an author, if you own a business, basically if you're anyone at all, then what you put out of yourself is your product. Even if you're just a normal person who wants a job, what you put out of yourself is your product. I'm proud that when you Google my name, the first 15 links that come out are something professional about me. My personal Facebook page doesn't even come out for like 2 pages. It's my LinkedIn, it's my blog, it's my website on Amazon, etc., etc., etc. AnomalyCon pops up, several interviews of me in public, like newspapers and things like that. So controlling what's available for you is difficult because it's hard to, especially when you have an uncommon name like mine and you Google my name, you're going to get me. That's just how it is. But if you have a more common name, who knows? But I guarantee you that most employers are Googling their potential employees.
I try to seed I try to use different identities around. I was, so I have a name I use on Twitter. I actually have my real name on Google Plus, but I've got that really locked down. I have my real name on Facebook. I don't post there at all. But I did a search of myself, and I started digging, and I hadn't even think about it. I had put my same name I used on Twitter with my first name on Etsy, because I buy stuff for my wife for Christmas. And I was like, oh, okay, you can put that together, and there's a picture of you. Oh, look, it's the same person who's on my Twitter. Oh, look,
I
they can
love
probably. And so there is, it is interesting. It's kind of trying to manage. If you want to remain anonymous, it is interesting how things can pop up in a Google search that I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about the fact that my account on Etsy would link me to my Twitter, and
The worst thing is having a LinkedIn profile. If you don't want anyone to find you, just take yourself off of LinkedIn right now, because LinkedIn is like notorious for, here's all this personal information in this person's resume. You want all of that. You just have to pay us a few cents. You know?
yeah, if you're not paying for it,
You
are the product. Yes.
Yep, Dice is the same way. Dice is pretty awesome that way. I get a lot of phone calls from questionable recruiters for my skill set, and I'm pretty sure it's just because I have a clearance on my resume.
So, here's an interesting question. He said, as the one who wrote the question. I don't know why I said it was an interesting question. Sorry. Who is responsible for the security of what you put online? So, for example, with Facebook, you can tell it to make everything private until they tell it not to. But we've had some pretty high-profile things in the UK. There was a huge issue where reporters were hacking into people's voicemails, including, deleting voicemails talking about victims of crime. So like a kidnapped child, they deleted the message from, so really horrible stuff. And then we've just recently had this whole thing with the celebrities from iCloud, their photographs. And I completely, on the one hand, I'm in this weird state where there's no difference in my mind from someone, peeking through someone's window with binoculars versus stealing your pictures online. At the same time, there's something akin to putting anything in the cloud and thinking it's secure is much similar to sort of leaving it on the sidewalk and thinking it's secure.
The problem, yes. So there's a big argument about that in particular, like with all these celebrities' photographs being stolen, and this ridiculous commentary that if they didn't want the photographs stolen, they shouldn't have taken nude pictures in specific.
That is absolutely ridiculous.
It's ridiculous because that is the same thing as telling someone, if you don't want your house robbed, don't buy stuff.
Right.
It's ridiculous. The answer is that the responsibility is on the criminal not to steal. It's your responsibility to lock your freaking car because you know people are assholes. Don't make it easier for them. But at the same time, that doesn't mean stop living your freaking life and become a hermit because you're afraid that everybody else is going to steal your stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was building on that. I would think that there's an extra layer there. I mean, specifically in the cloud, in the cloud hacking situation, there is a responsibility of the company providing the service to maintain that security. If they can't keep their freaking security, on what is at least supposed to be an encrypted service, up to date, then it's their fault that these, then it's as much their fault as the idiots who hacked the system.
It's in their agreement, a promise to keep your information safe.
Right.
If their agreement says we promise, then they sure as hell better make it right.
On the other hand, if your account is under your name and your password is secret,
Okay, yeah, that's definitely.
I'm not saying that this is the case here. I'm posing.
Well, and actually, those celebrity photos that were taken was not a compromise of the system itself. It was brute force. They were able to determine because of
Brute
the
force
passwords.
attacks are
Yes.
really.
By the way, who in this room thinks passwords are actually secure? What the way of securing your data?
Well, if they're long enough.
How long do you think they have?
I do about 15 characters now, right?
Are they completely random?
Yes.
Okay, he has actual secure passwords. He's probably the only person in this room who does.
Really? You think so?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
So the secret class doesn't know how to make. Well, that's
So-
my job.
Well, you did Ulster.
No. So it's like having a lock on your house.
Yes. It will
Discourage
discourage people.
It will discourage people. It will. they're going to go after the low-hanging fruit.
Here's the thing. They take, they've done this several times, and they've done this with Facebook, and they've done this with several services. They take the system list, and they give a group of people X amount of time, and within 4 hours, between 60 and 80% of the accounts are compromised.
Right. Because there's a
Using
Brava
passwords.
list. And
Yeah,
stuff.
and
that's
dictionary
human
attacks.
error. Actual brute force attacks are 100% effective given enough time.
Right,
The better
but
your password, the longer the amount of time.
Right.
And if they're caught before that amount of time expires, then your password is still secure.
the problem is that they can try so many passwords so quickly. If you are truly a random sequence of characters, figuring out your 15-digit password will take a really long time.
Actually,
If it-
technically speaking, it doesn't matter whether you're random or not as long as you're not repeating a lot of characters.
No, it matters a huge amount if your password is made up of real words.
So
or variations
I
of real
slightly
words.
disagree with you. I actually am of the evidence-based opinion that you are safer, provided you're not including common dictionary words, you are safer with a password that is real words with no strange characters, because
You mean like a
those-
phrase? You mean
like
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 a
a-
random nonsense phrase?
with a
That used
phrase,
to be true.
with a phrase, or with actual, like, for example, sandfish rock. Because if you don't replace the A with an @ sign, if you don't replace the O with a 0, the system is trained to look for words with the letters replaced, because everyone tricks their passwords that way. So
As-
the problem is that behaviorally the system has evolved.
Yeah, for what it's worth, most of those tools will actually try all of the variants. So they will start with the English word. Not that I've ever,
Of course not.
but to the camera. Not that I've ever.
The point is that computers, if a computer is not locked in a safe and dropped to the bottom of the
Exactly.
ocean, it's hackable. Yeah.
Yes.
That is the point.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, it's almost impossible to truly secure what you're putting out on the cloud.
The important thing is to do risk management.
Yes.
Risk management is what's on your side of the responsibility. It's the same is true if you're a large organization, small organization, doesn't matter. The risk management is you having a secure password, is you using different user IDs in different places. For the love of God, do not use the same user ID and password on your email address, the most hackable, and your freaking bank accounts, et cetera, et cetera. And if you happen to be a woman who happens to be outspoken, use a lot of different user account names, because otherwise you're going to get hacked eventually.
But it does bring up an interesting point, because we're talking about, wow, we now live in a world where you have to bifurcate your personality and how you present yourself. Maybe that's not different from, a housewife in the 50s, I don't know, but.
I wouldn't say that. I think it's actually true that you've always had to go that route, because unless you are a really boring person, you've never been able to tell your...
Unless you're a really boring person, I don't know why she's singling.
Yeah, well.
I'm the person in my line of sight.
I would say it's different because now individuals are doing things that used to be the purveyance of government. I mean, governments would have to shred documents and keep secrets, and now it's individuals have to do that also, so it is a difference, I would say.
When I was a field engineer several years ago, there was this person who lived around the corner from my office, who unfortunately I had to deliver and set up some equipment for him. And he was freaking paranoid, like on a really disturbing level. He was convinced the government was out to get him because of some documents he'd supposedly written. He sent care packages to, army people out in Iraq or whatever. So one day he shows up at my office, banging on the window of my field engineer car, because he's convinced that this HP printer product that is on his computer, because I sold him an HP printer and set it up for him, and it's just a print spooler for him. He's convinced that this is spyware from the government that I have installed on his system, and he's banging on my door, wanting to kill me in my car. Needless to say, I was locking the door and dialing 911, because he was convinced that this thing was out to get him. And that's a little bit of the problem, is that people don't actually know what they're getting, and whatever, I'm not saying everybody needs to be highly technical or anything like that, just need to be awareness and understanding that I don't know what I don't know without getting freaked out about it. That's a big part of it.
Also, along with all of this, how many people, and be honest, have actually read a service agreement. Word for word, I'm.
Yes, but it was for my product.
I think that's cheating.
Frankly, I'm less likely to read them now, ironically, than I used to be. And part of that's because I have this giant legal department that reads through all my service agreements.
So someone figured out that if you actually, the average person read all of the legalese they had to agree to, it would take something like a month out of a year of time to do that.
Have they actually taken a service agreement to court? I have a feeling they wouldn't stand up.
It's very unclear, and in fact, one of the things that the lawyers with whom I work say is, to some extent, you might be more secure if you have not read it, because if you go into court and say it's ridiculous that I could ever possibly read or understand this, I'm not a lawyer. You actually, and you're not a lawyer. You actually have slightly more of a defense that, oh yes, I read it in detail and then did whatever X I did.
Right.
There's no legal, but do not take that as legal.
Advice?
I have heard lawyers say that though.
It has to do with consent.
Right.
If you didn't understand it, you didn't consent
Right.
properly.
Well,
Maybe.
unfortunately, that argument only
Partially,
sort of
yeah.
works, right? Because technically speaking, also, ignorance of the law is no excuse. So it depends entirely on the language based on the agreement, and it also depends on how they got you to agree. If you had to check a box and click next versus just clicking next means you agree to this agreement, because a lot of them will say that. If you have to check a box, you're in a lot more trouble than if you just hit next and it says installing this product constitutes agreement. You know, and in a lot of cases, it's actually really scary because a lot of open source stuff, which people love to use, a ton of open source agreements include something that basically states that by using that product, you give the rights of everything created by that product out into the global, which means that as someone working on a government program, you know, we have to be really paranoid about what open source stuff we're allowed to use, because some of it basically, if you broke down that legal licensing agreement, I would have to give my program for free out there because
Yeah,
I use their stupid open source product.
It's a bit sort of, yeah, I think that's a GPL. I mean, there's
Yeah,
different,
there's
different.
no
Creative
license,
Commons.
Yeah, they're like the BSD license is really just,
And
you have to put this boilerplate on it and you can do
Right.
whatever you want with it.
But the GPL says if I take your code and I modify it, I have to make available the code with the mods in it. And that is, now just that library, but there's definitely some, well, I use this library and it's part of my missile control system. Well, I have to release my entire missile control system
Yeah,
to the
yeah, like
public.
you want your opponents to,
Right.
we're not allowed to use open source software because of that, because it's legal. It's like we don't want to run
But
that
you
risk.
also, but you
then you have
almost
some
can't
problems,
build
right?
browser apps these
Java's
days
a
without
little
using-
iffy.
Well, we don't use Java, but we're a Microsoft shop. Our CEO plays golf with Bill Gates, so.
I would love to, there are certain products I just love to say, no, we're never allowed to have that again. ActiveX, Java, here's a solution to your privacy problems. Never install Java or ActiveX, problem solved.
ActiveX drives me, this is way off topic, but we have so many people still using IE8 because they want the ActiveX abilities that are on by default in IE8. But ActiveX basically says, hey, if you click on a link on whatever the hell it likes on your hard drive. I think some users, but anyway, we're off topic.
That's what I want to go for.
Yes, that would be great. My apologies. So let's switch topics a little bit to, there's a category of software called creepyware, which has to do with data mining and how data is used.
Oh, is that what they're calling it now?
Yeah, creepyware, isn't that a great name? So the classic real world example was Target was figuring out based on people shopping habits whether someone was pregnant or not. And they were
That's creepy.
sending coupons for diapers and formula and
But
sometimes
Amazon's been doing this for years.
sometimes the woman didn't know. Sometimes it would go to the house with the father, whose daughter was the one who was pregnant, who would see this. So, what's your take on that? I mean, they just watched what you bought. They didn't. The algorithms were just, well, if you buy corn nuts and pickles, I'm exaggerating, but you're probably pregnant. Like,
I hope I'm
it's
not.
hopefully a little more involved with that.
You can make money with that though if you are.
Well,
I would say that yeah, it's absolutely creepy. It's not really illegal.
Neither
But-
is spyware technically, which
Right.
is really unfortunate.
Right. But I would think that it comes down to the level of integrity of the company. If the company is all about data mining in order to specifically target products to people, and that's what their goal is, then it's just doesn't sound like a great company to me.
but everyone does it.
Amazon. Amazon's been doing this for ages. In fact, it's their business model.
Or Google with filter bubbles. If you search anything on Google,
Yeah.
it automatically gives you results depending on what you've gotten results for before. Like, I don't use Google to search, I use DuckDuckGo and some of these other smaller ones. And it annoys anyone else who uses my computer because they all like Google for some reason. I'm like, no.
Security is the opposite of convenience.
Actually, my dad, even before computers, ran into an issue because he was doing timeshare for a hotel in Vail, and they were sending out stuff. But occasionally what would happen is somebody was having an affair, and you send it to the home address, and then the other person's going, "What were you doing to me?"
I mean, that sounds like a plot for a TV show.
Yeah, it does.
The thing with Amazon, they're now going to have these drones and they're going to have these stores where they're saying, okay, you've bought X, Y, and Z. We think you're going to buy A next. Does this strike anyone else as really creepy? As very scary?
Why is it called creepyware, right? I mean,
Well, to be honest, I mean, at least on the Amazon side of things, and Target's creepy in a different way, like figuring out people are pregnant. But on the Amazon side of things, it bases most of its algorithms on ratings. So like, if you buy a particular book, then the things that it shows you as suggestions are someone reviewed both books, and so you'll like this book because someone who liked that book likes this book. So it's always, at least on Amazon up until possibly recently, has been based on reviews more than anything else. And in fact, that was their biggest selling point when they first started getting people to review books and stuff like that, was they kind of started this idea before Facebook ever came up with it or anybody else ever came up with it. Amazon came up with this idea that if someone reviews a book and they say, hey, look, I reviewed that book, their friends will also be interested in that product because they realize that they, and so it was a way of publicizing word of mouth and making it more digital. And so since they started that whole idea of an individual review process outside of like paid reviewers like CNET, in fact, God help you if you've ever trusted CNET, because they've all been paid reviewers for forever. So.
you have a thought?
No.
Oh, okay.
But with that though, like I, for example, searched, unfortunately, on Google for an umbrella trellis. I wanted a very specific thing. Only on Google, only once, got it. The next time I went to Amazon, that same thing came up. So it's not reviews. These people are talking to each other.
They're not.
That's actually cookie
It's
company.
cookies, yeah.
Those,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh.
So what happens is you buy, people, the way that Google makes their money
It's like
primarily
cookies after every-
is by selling ads and selling clicks on ads. And you can pay for, if these keywords come up, I want my thing to show up here. You can pay more for when someone buys something at this site, please get me enough information. In fact, Zappos, who's supposed to be the most wonderful cuddly company in the world, they're famous for their ads that follow you from site to site.
I'm relatively internet savvy, and I delete cookies, and I go in every couple of
Yes,
days. And I
which
still
type
have
of
that.
cookies do you delete? Because there's more than one kind of cookie, and you
There's
might not
this-
be able to delete all
They
of
may
them.
not be able
There's
to-
this-
Yes.
There's this really creepy thing that has been coming up recently, and it is based off of this creepware, and you have to opt out of it in Facebook and several other sites, but there are a couple of sites you can go to opt out of it for everyone. And what's happening is your browser is actually, from Microsoft or from Chrome, it doesn't matter, your browser is selling 180 sites, all the same details about you. So the only way to bypass that is either to opt out of it, to make sure they don't do that, because basically all the sites are sharing information because they're all the same on the back end, or by running, like in the case of IE, it's like in private browsing, or Chrome has their own version or whatever, so they block the websites from gathering the cookies.
You can go in, you can actually go in Chrome, and I do this, is you can select which sites you want to allow to have cookies. You can turn cookies off by default and then whitelist what you want. So
That's not like,
yeah, so, but there are other types of cookies that are more difficult to get rid of. Flash is one thing, one type of, they use to store information. I basically nuke that. There's different extensions you can get, at least for Chrome, that will block any known tracking.
There is
I'm a
a,
big fan of the ad
yeah,
blocker.
yeah, one of the new ones that is actually used by some of the bigger purveyors of ads on the internet is something called fingerprinting, where what they do is they figure out, well, you're using this browser and it's running kind of at this speed and I see this amount of memory, and apparently it is 90% accurate that you go to another site and they've got this fingerprint and they can tell it's you. So you turned off everything in the browser, you did everything right.
Let's see,
Yeah, well, yeah.
And then it's, so they know you're a Mac user. And,
Well, so
And
that
then
works out, it's like, oh, we
easier to
found
pinpoint.
the Mac user, so therefore,
right, but
you know.
no, I don't mind. Actually, I don't mind ads. I just don't want them to target.
I hate the ones that freaking play automatically. Those
Yeah.
drive me freaking bonkers.
And Facebook
Privacy
does this
aside.
thing too, where Facebook has this affiliate thing. So if you, I will not surf anywhere else if I've logged into Facebook, because what they do is they place these cookies and they have these affiliates and they want you to go out and like stuff on other sites, and then they can track. And then we've had situations where, kind of like what you were talking about, you know, somebody being outed for whatever thing they were trying to keep private. Hey, did you know that somebody was investigating butt plugs? You know, it's like,
Yeah, I ordered a book-free panel that we did last night, and I was paranoid as all get out for clearing out all of my information because that's an old other story.
I love when people on Facebook make cracks about, oh, NSA's watching me now, and I'm just like, no, I'm sure if they
Facebook-
actually cared about you, you
the
would
NSA is
already
just
know.
watching, sitting back and just siphoning what Google and Facebook are picking up.
So, actually, Google did, this is sort of a line, they did probably one of the more evil things I have seen, and of course, Google is no evil. We actually had to look at the JavaScript to see what they were doing. You'd go and click and, wait, I didn't mean to click on that link, and you think, oh, I must have just clicked, I was too slow, or I was too fast, or whatever. And then it happened again, and it happened again. You go to click, and they timed it just when you're about to click, the ads pop in.
Interesting.
So the ads are the top 5 links on Google are paid links. The links below that are free links. And something would come up, and you go to click on it, and just at the right moment, and it would just well enough to make you think like you had not waited long enough, the link would click in for the ad, which would often take you to the same place, but charge the company, because every click, the company has to pay.
Wow.
And I was like, that is evil. They only did it, they stopped doing it after a couple of weeks.
They
They
also
were
had to start
experimenting.
Yes.
throwing up that they have a tiny little thing that says these are sponsored links. So I got in trouble for that, for having the links not be identified as sponsored. So they're slightly separated, sort of, but you can't necessarily see that separation if you're on, say, an Android browser.
Yes. They used to make it really clear, and now they've moved away, but
Well, it seems like you guys could start a company now like White Hat, which would try to keep you from all this stuff.
there are companies that do, the problem is it's you know, the reason that trees are tall is because they have to be taller than other trees. If all of the trees could agree to be this tall, they would be much happier and wouldn't have to waste all that energy going to it. It's the same thing. It's a constant ongoing war
Right.
between the ad creators and the ad viewers, between the security people and the...
But people who are just users,
Are
I mean,
screwed.
I can't keep, I mean, I don't code, so it's like try to keep up on all this.
I will tell you, I mean, I'm reasonably tech savvy. I can spout all of the buzzwords related to security stuff. And I know that I am completely insecure because I've got to the point where, I mean, I'm not completely insecure, but I'm to the point where I am not willing to go to the amount of effort it would take to be secure.
Right.
And I made that conscious decision. It's like, you know what? I'm very careful about banks and my email and so forth, but most of the time it's like, I have given up. I just, you know, I don't feel like...
Yeah, like you're saying, you don't want to do something, you don't want to like walk around in a bad neighborhood with money hanging out of your pocket.
Yeah.
I don't go that far.
But yeah.
I wear clothes with money. You know.
My take on it is I know that I'm not ever going to be 100% secure, but I don't damn enough want to make it easy for these jackasses.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
But how much time do you spend?
not a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't obsess about it, you know, it's like, oh,
man,
you know,
I
it's
have a
like,
friend who has like 50 periods in his Wi-Fi password because he's so paranoid. And I'm like, that's great. It's cool for you. But frankly, I'd rather have, you know, whatever. I change my Wi-Fi password every so often, and it's something complicated, but something complicated that is, people aren't going to guess it, you know? But at the same time, it's like, the average person isn't getting hacked either. It's not, it's often random. You know, it's not like every single person out there is getting hacked at every given moment.
targeted.
Exactly.
Targeted
Very few
versus
people-
hacked. You know,
very
if you're
few
part of a
people are
botnet,
targeted.
it's pretty likely.
I'm pleased to say that my Facebook and email accounts, other than it's questionable, it's possible my GeoCities email account that still exists somewhere that they wouldn't let me delete probably has been hacked at some point.
Well, you
Don't
have
care.
those too.
Oh, before it
With
was
the little
even
flaming
GeoCities.
icons.
Before it was even GeoCities. I don't even remember what it was before then, but I started with them before that because I was making websites at 10.
Well, back in the day.
You know, back when they were first, like, everybody had free websites, and they didn't even have ads for a while, you know, back then.
But back, I realized we didn't answer Dave's question. Back to the, I would say if you can, keep your computer patched. Clean out your cookies periodically. Use private browsing if you're concerned about something.
Always use HTTPS to talk to every website that you possibly can, including
Right.
Google.
And
Yeah,
generally, don't click on something unless you know what you click it on.
Yeah.
I mean, that should be a
Yeah.
given, but for some reason it isn't.
Yeah, this is one of those
Don't
basic
install
things.
pages.
If never click on a link, never open an attachment, and if it's from someone you know, never click on it and never open it. I mean, that's kind of the only way I can.
unless they told you through another channel, hey, I'm gonna send you a picture now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, unless you.
It's the upside to like, I mean, Gmail's super targeted, so unfortunately it gets hacked a lot. Hasn't happened for us or for our Google business mail, but the upside is that at least Gmail populates the images if they're real images, they're a legit
Right,
file,
yeah.
so you can see it in the email text. So at least you know it's a real file.
Which, by the way, is one of the really common things that spam purveyors take advantage of. You open the email, you see the picture. If you look at the URL for that picture, it has a long string of letters and numbers at the end, which basically says, hey, that's Timmy. So therefore, I know that I now have a valid email address and I can keep sending mail to Timmy.
As long as they have the cookies.
No, they don't need that, because they sent it to your email address, and that picture came from their server.
Oh, I was thinking of,
Yeah.
never mind.
Yeah, no, yeah.
I think we only have like a couple more minutes, so does anybody have like a legit question? Not how do I
As
stay
opposed to
secure?
the
'cause good
illegit
luck.
questions that I've been asking.
Our fax is secure.
Faxes
Oh my God, don't even give me.
they have been hacked back in the day, but.
You know what? Let's do a very quick definition of secure. No, and this is why. You can't control who sees it.
Yeah, but there is something like that.
It boggles my mind that all these companies are still trying to use fax and claim that it's secure, especially government agencies, especially healthcare, because any idiot can take the fax back off the machine. You don't know who saw it.
Yeah, there's Charles Stross has a book called Rule 34, and one of the things he has is 3D printer spam. So if you thought Viagra ads were bad before something had started, but we used to, I mean, back in the day we used to get spam on faxes, and it was hard because you had to pay for that.
Yeah.
So that was a whole.
We still get spam on faxes in my office occasionally.
That implies you still have a fax
Yeah, we
machine.
do have a fax machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Because you work at a government facility, right?
Oh, no, actually, it's a private company, but,
Yeah, well,
but
But
it's,
it's working with them.
yeah.
Oregon State government, and we tell people, please do not email us your social security number because we use Google now.
Well, so the thing about it is that if it's in print, it's not secure, frankly.
Yeah.
Which is, and one of the problems that we have where I work is you will get creepy callers who will call, they will randomly call an extension. and they will tell you that they are calling like from your HR or whatever else and try to confirm personal information. So of course we have to warn people all the time. We've had like LinkedIn blitzes where somebody hacks a LinkedIn of somebody in the company and then blitzes out invites to everyone else to verify people who work at the company. Because that's the first thing that they need in order to start hacking information. And the thing about it is, if it's in print, it's not actually secure. But if you can control who's looking at it, it's controlling risk. There's no such thing as true 100%. It's never unhackable. It's never impossible for them to get their hands on it. You're just controlling the risk. The lower the risk, the less likely it is for it to get hacked.
So
or get
basically,
grabbed.
the only way to be secure is not to use electronic media.
At all. Ever. Or a pen and pencil, or a telephone, or really anything.
If you have
Ever.
nothing to hide, then you've got nothing to worry about.
If you're not hermit dude, as long as you don't leave
Yeah.
your woods, right, then you're secure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Unabomber was the most secure person in the country.
And they still caught him, so.
Yeah.
Because he put stuff on paper. So actually, let's do last remarks, since we are past time.
Well, one thing that in researching for this panel, it didn't come up, but I found out something interesting the other day. Facebook has actually called out the DEA because the DEA was taking information from people and posing as those people in order to try to entrap other people in things like drug schemes and so forth.
And the DEA has been called out a lot of times because
Oh, yeah.
their methods are ridiculously questionable. Like, hands down, between the DEA and the CSA, I feel so secure in our country.
Well, and the DEA is using so much that was created for anti-terrorism for
Exactly.
anti-drug. But
Yeah, I'm just actually encouraged that Facebook is trying to stand up to them. We'll see what happens with it, but I think it could just be a publicity ploy on their part, but it also could be, pretty valid.
Well, the DEA is not going to pay them for Facebook pages.
Yeah, I find that one thing to look at is how does the company you're interacting with get their money? Are they selling ads? They're going to want to store the information, so be cognizant of the information you're giving. You just got to trust at some point. It's like, if you're going to interact online, you just have to kind of just say, okay, I just have to trust at some point, because, like you said, you can't live in a cabin in the woods.
not without ending the world. Yeah, for me, I think.
That was an awesome movie.
Yeah, I love that movie. That's a really movie. For me, I think I think you have to be deliberate. I think you can no longer live in a world where you'll just kind of wander along and make something public and something private. You need to make conscious decisions about how far you're willing to go and what the decisions are you're going to make, and then you need to act in that way. What is the balance of convenience between Amazon telling me, hey, there's this other movie you might like, which is kind of cool, versus Target,
Right.
telling my significant other that,
I have herpes.
Probably a good plan. Don't do
Yes.
anything you don't want your SO to know. That's a good. Don't get online if you want to keep it secret.
That's a great one for out of context.
Yeah.
Tim Simpson, I have herpes.
On film.
Well, I mean, I got a lot of last thoughts in throughout, but ultimately, I think that the biggest thing is that you have to balance paranoia with your understanding that everybody on the other side of it is a real person. It doesn't mean they have your best interest in mind, but everybody on the other side is real in some way. And that's part of the problem too, is that people can gather information, like one of the big scams on Facebook out there is these like farms. And these like farms will say things like if you understand, and they're basically pegging people's ages. Or my personal favorite is, and by favorite I mean I hate this, is this stupid thing people share that says, I bet you can't name a single city that starts with blah, and inevitably everybody posts the city they live in. Let me just tell you where I am. let me give you all this information. And these like forms are basically designed to gather sympathy for dying puppies, and gather sympathy for these people who supposedly are trying to get 10,000 likes, whatever. They then sell those pages, and the information that they gather from that is one of the ways that they go out and hack other people's accounts, because inevitably people use simple passwords that have things like the city they live in, or their pet's name, or whatever, and they are searching for this basic information to make it easier to perform brute force attacks. And so that is the kind of stuff you gotta be aware of. You just gotta use some freaking common sense. Some idiot who is dying of cancer is probably not getting his picture shared around 10,000 times because Bill Gates said he'd pay for his surgery. Let's face it, that shit doesn't happen.
Yeah. Although I think the creepiest thing about Facebook might be Farmville, but anyway. Anyway, thank you all for coming, appreciate it. Done.
Yeah, closing ceremonies.